It's amazing to think of the cartoons that stick with us throughout our lives, the grand epics that continue to leave us in awe, the musicals that we can't still help but sing decades after hearing them for the first time. There's a lifetime's worth of unanimously agreed upon classic animated features that will transcend time, and they continue to make the world better with each new life they touch. But it's not just the dozens of critical darlings that make up the library of animated movies that stay with us. It's the offbeat one-offs, the failed attempts at creating franchises, the passion projects that went awry. Those are the cartoons that for some reason we keep with us and seemingly have no choice in the matter. The inexplicable feeling we get from watching the same movie years later, the ability to transport us back to that era of our past we can only go to by replaying these films, that's why they're important. They're gateways, each one a different vessel, capable of carrying us to that period in our childhood that will hold an internal influence through our adulthood. The 1997 animated movie Pippi Longstocking has that hold on me. Based on a Swedish series of books beginning in 1945 by Astrid Lindgren, starring a young girl named Pippi Longstocking, a world traveler who also happens to possess superhuman strength. The stories were adapted from the books into various TV shows and movies from 1969 to 1988, and this was the first foray into the animated sphere, in an attempt to introduce the character to a new audience of kids. The movie had a limited US theatrical release and acted as a larger pilot episode for a future Pippi Longstocking animated series, but it's probably most well known by people as a standalone film. So how did an animated feature starring a character based on a book from Europe from the 1940s fare when presented to late 1990s America? It's a character that will last forever, but will this movie? Let's take a look at 1997's Pippi Longstocking. The adventure begins on a ship sailing the high seas, with a smartly dressed monkey named Mr. Nilsson running around the ship, climbing the mast to see Pippi Longstocking, the captain's daughter, who breaks into song about her worldly travels, which includes standing on top of Mount Kilimanjaro and dancing with lions on the Serengeti, as she excitedly shouts, "What shall I do today?" The song is as inspiring and adventurous as its thrill-seeking heroine, cutting between her global escapades and everyday life on the boat. It's a delight to see Pippi ride past the Egyptian pyramids by way of camel, then passing time on board the ship, standing out on the mast, or air drying her socks during high noon. It does a great job in building this life for Pippi through the accumulation of these experiences that kids and adults alike would envy, and the back and forth between these two portions of her life also act as a subtle, yet effective way of showing the passage of time, indicating this lifestyle has been her standard for presumably her entire life, her ultimate happiness being her freedom to do as she pleases at any time, singing, "I am the sea and nobody owns me," before settling in for the night. As far as opening songs go, it's hard not to be enraptured by the bouncing and light, swashbuckling melody. So airy, one could almost feel the same sun and wind flowing through her hair. For as fun as the song is, the true star is Pippi's voice actress, Melissa Altro. From the first line, her singing voice and speaking as seen going forward are the highlight of the film. Her performance is youthful, blissfulness and excitement seeping from every word, but backed by a lifetime of exploration and enthusiasm from encountering so many different cultures and ways of life. She has an abundance of confidence in herself, but to the point it crosses over into naivete as well, and is impressively conveyed merely through her committed, high-pitched, almost constant yelling. The voice is instantly recognizable, and ends up becoming, at the very least, the most iconic modern-day version of the character, and stacks up alongside any of the most famous live-action Pippis. Of course, the voice can only go so far, and this Pippi might not be as collectively memorable if it weren't for the slight update to her design, which is a perfect match to Altro's overly energetic take on the young girl, who seems a few years older than her originally conceived 9-year-old self, as seen in various books and movies to that point, as we see her a little taller, a little more gangly, though maybe only perceived that way due to her mismatched thigh-high socks and short blue overshirt, the only thing remaining the exact same being her classic braids and freckles. My only wish for this song is that though we get to see what Pippi's life is like, we don't see the most unique aspect of her character, her superhuman strength. To this point, the most recent US released product for the brand was 1988's The New Adventures of Pippi Longstocking. So this, being the first fully animated project for the character, was essentially introducing a brand new character to a generation that probably wasn't familiar with her. So giving as much pertinent information as possible would go a long way in helping communicate who she is. It doesn't have to be anything major either. Perhaps a funny line, something like, "My horse gives me a lift, and I give him one back," as she would lift the horse with one hand, or any other visual show of her strength. There's an instance where during the song, a group of sailors are struggling to pull a rope, but Pippi tugs on it and they achieve their goal. But if you weren't aware of Pippi's superhuman abilities, then it might look like she was just the small tipping point. Even just making it so we see Pippi do it herself as the sailors are resting, or maybe they're pulling on the rope and they all fall on their backs, and we pan to Pippi, showing that she was behind them and did all the heavy lifting with just one hand. It would be a simple way of revealing to the audience there's more to her than meets the eye. Despite that small wish, the first song sets the movie on a course for a merry time. Or it would be, were it not for a storm that night, which washes her father, who I can't help but think of Captain Kitty from the original Tom and Jerry movie every time I see him, overboard into the ocean. After a failed attempt to rescue him via lifeboat, he yells at her not to come in after him by saying, "Don't worry, I'm so fat I'll float." It's cartoon logic at its best, and just a plain funny line to comfort her in this tense moment. For being 5 minutes into the movie, we've gotten a catchy song and a scary action scene that sets these high stakes. There couldn't be a better start to this movie. The next day, the ship arrives at port, and Pippi, her pet monkey Mr. Nilsson, and pet horse, appropriately named Horse, ride into town with her suitcase, to the tune of another Pippi-led song, which acts as another introduction for herself. There are few songs that have only one or two lines that are as compulsively repeatable as this song has. The ones I still find myself singing after all these years are the lines, "Heyo, I'm Pippi, Pippi IOA, home and I'm happy as can be. My name is Pippi, Pippi hip hooray, what a fabulous day." This is the movie's most well-known song, easily the catchiest, and perfectly captures Pippi's being in its purest form, as she announces her return home. It's surprising that this is the most memorable song, given how light it is on lyrical substance. Most of the song is her announcing her own name and saying what a beautiful day it is, but Altro's voice is so perfect for the character and the vibe of the song. This hero's triumphant return actually reminds me a lot of Belle's venture into town in Beauty and the Beast, the way they interact with the locals and the world around them, but there's a philosophy in their approaches that I wish Pippi would have followed to make the scene and the song more impactful. In Beauty and the Beast, Belle is the quiet, reserved, only normal resident, surrounded by these larger-than-life personalities, but they're all so obtuse, they see her as the oddball in town. And that's a common approach to character juxtapositions. If the main character is normal, then the world around them should be loony. And it works inversely as well, with the wacky character inhabiting space among a more reserved population. And this is how I wish the song was approached, with Pippi's big personality making it known to everyone she has returned. Even if the lyrics aren't changed, Give her a little more to do. She rides horse through town and jumps into a tree. But other than that, it's light on anything going on. Make her steer horse and not realize he knocks over a fruit cart, or make her wave to someone as they pass by, and the distraction causes the person to crash on their bike and cause a pileup. It doesn't have to be anything radical, but show what her coming home is like, not only for her excited self, but for the residents of the town as well. It's already a supremely appealing song, and I feel like it could have been even better with just a few minor additions. She arrives at her home, and next door, the new kids in town, brother and sister Tom and Annika, play croquet to cure their ever-growing boredom after having moved from the bustling city. Pippi, meanwhile, unpacks her home using her super breath, which would be interesting to see more of and possibly learn about, and it would be fun to see how these powers she has are woven into daily tasks, or other aspects of her existence. After sprucing up the house, she finishes by emptying her suitcase of gold coins into the treasure chest nonchalantly placed in the middle of her living room. After Tom and Annika greet Mrs. Priscillius, the town snob, who rides by on her bike with her lapdog, they see Pippi walking backwards in the middle of the street, explaining that it's a free country when asked why she's doing that. Pippi's humor specifically is very childlike. It can be extremely literal, but also very old-timey in a Tom Sawyer-esque sort of way, where the humor wasn't disobedience or talking to adults as equals, or not minding manners to a T, which does make sense, given the original book releasing in 1945, so this would have been in line with what would be considered what kids might find humorous at that time. The trio hit it off, and as she invites them inside for a home-cooked breakfast, where Pippi goes into a third song, making an elaborate meal, while telling them the true recipe for life. It's a fast-paced song this time, and is an entertaining showcase for how Pippi lives, zipping around the kitchen, juggling eggs and bowls and dancing on the furniture. This is exactly what I've been waiting to see from Pippi. There's nobody else we've seen like her, and I want to experience what it is that makes her so different from others. Her tossing the ingredients up in the air and effortlessly catching them and perfectly smashing the eggs between her hands is my favorite. It's the most endearing side that we've gotten out of her so far, and the song is euphoric, as she sings how the recipe for life includes a happy heart, a dream, and seasoning it with travel. The funniest line being, "Life is just a piece of cake, and I'm its little sweetie." Their fun is interrupted by Mrs. Priscillius, who is appalled by Pippi's lack of parental supervision, as she watches the young girl clean her table by throwing plates up into the air and catching them in the tablecloth. It's actions like these that make Pippi seem larger than life, but in a grounded way, since the characters are surprised by what she can do, but still realize she's a little girl, even when she scrubs the floor by skating around on brushes. Mrs. Priscillius insists Pippi be placed into a children's home, to which Pippi responds, "You'll have to find children for your children's home somewhere else. I'll stay right here." As a young kid, hearing Pippi put an adult in their place with a smart comeback, it's the kind of a legendary quote my young brain wishes it would have come up with at that time, and still appeals to the kid at heart in me. Pippi reveals she has no reason to worry about money either, showing Mrs. Priscillius her treasure chest of coins. Mrs. Priscillius stomps out of the house, vowing to return, as she walks away with one pancake stuck to each side of her behind. Again, this tickles the kid in me like nothing else. We move to the town jail, where a pair of locked-up criminals, the scrawny, pointy-nosed Bloom and the massive Thunder Carlson, sing about the only things they want in life: an English bowler hat for Bloom and a gold tooth for Thunder. A conceivable argument could be made for any of the songs being one's favorite, but to me, this one is the movie's best. The singing is top-notch, and tonally, a fresh change of pace from the first three, less boisterous, more wistful, and easily the most imaginative, as the two fantasize about their lives once they acquire the objects of their desires. It starts off in their jail cell, but the romanticizing about their new lives builds up, riding unicycles on stage, piloting a yacht, all across a number of luxurious backdrops. The art remains interesting as well, with the lighting being so engaging and even the art style changing periodically. This is also the strongest song lyrically, and funny to boot, with my favorite line having Thunder singing, "I want a tooth, one I can lie through." I only wish, much like the previous songs, we got even a brief introduction to these characters. They only quickly mention each other's names once, and if you miss it, they may never come up again in a way that would be immediately recognizable. Plus, we don't know what they're in jail for. Maybe before going to them, the police talk about the two prisoners, who they are, and what they're in for, so they can enter it in their files. Or the two criminals talk about how they bungled up their last crime and ended up in prison, all in an attempt to get money to make their wishes come true. It would help to understand the characters a little better, but similar to the previous songs, it's such a great tune, it hardly matters. Mrs. Priscillius enters the police station, complaining to the twin police officers that Pippi is living at her home alone with a chest full of money and doesn't even have the awareness to lock her door, which leads the thieves to pass out from the prospect of her riches being theirs. And in an unexpected twist, their song picks back up at an excited pace. It's a really nice touch, and the escalation of their status from aristocrats to being in the clouds is exceptional, easily the most underrated song and sequence in the movie. The next day, Pippi is up to her typical quirkiness, watering her plants during a downpour of rain, when Tom and Annika stop by on their way to school, making Pippi jealous with talk of them getting holidays. It's a welcome sight to see Pippi show another side of herself, feeling envious of the kids going to school. She's always happy, almost to the point of delirium, which is what makes her so likable. But seeing this new dimension to her, riddled by an unfamiliar jealousy, makes her both a more relatable and sympathetic figure. Later in the day, Pippi walks into the classroom, where she introduces herself to her new class by her full name, Pippi Loda Delicatessa Windowshade Mackerelmint Ephraim's daughter Longstocking, which is silly, but according to the original 1945 text, is technically her name. If there's one thing I didn't expect to learn in this movie, it was that her already unusual name was even more so. After taking a seat, the teacher asks the class what 7 plus 5 is, and Pippi pipes up, "Don't you know? If you don't know, don't think I'm gonna tell you." The teacher tells her it's 12, and Pippi responds, "You knew it all the time. Why did you ask?" And it's in a way where it blurs the line between earnest literalness and snark, with the kids gasping at whichever Pippi intended it to be. This takes me back to those early grade school days, where you would say something to a teacher that, in reality, wasn't that bad, but the fact that you sassed the teacher was blasphemous, and whatever was said had better have been worth it, because there was bound to be trouble following it. This segues into a song about the workings of attending school, with the teacher and Pippi singing at odds with each other. The teacher singing about the importance of multiplication and manners, while Pippi sings about plutification and how she'd rather have fun than learn. It captures that childlike attitude of wanting the fun, social aspects of school. Despite the teacher's ability to hold a note waning here and there, and the song being a bit busy at times, it's still another good one as a whole piece. After the bell rings, the teacher comments to Pippi how disappointed she is that she can't behave properly, and it seems to momentarily upset her. I love this moment because this is the first time, even more than when her father fell overboard, that she seems authentically hurt. That her actions bring an "I'm not mad, I'm disappointed" response. It's an unexpected reaction from Pippi that feels like the movie is starting to move in the direction that maybe this will be something that affects her going forward and may even play a major role in the story. But for now, she appears to brush it off, with Tom and Annika inviting her to her mother's tea party, and witnessing the circus coming to town. And probably my favorite line in the movie, right on brand with the old-timey humor, Annika tells Pippi it costs money to look at the circus, to which Pippi replies, "I go looking around all day. Who knows how much money I've stared up already?" The setup to that joke is a stretch, but the payoff is so silly, it's worth it. Pippi arrives at the tea party and helps herself to the cherry cake, face first, her entire face covered in frosting. And moments like these in animated movies are my favorite. In this case, Pippi is so excited by a treat, her gluttonous instincts take over, showing that she's a kid at heart in a way where she's excited by sweets, but also that she's a bit selfish, that juvenile behavior taking over her actions without hesitation. It's not as much a focal point to the movie, but I love in cartoons when characters perform these actions that give us insight as to who they really are. To me, this holds more weight than just Pippi likes cake. It tells me she's probably used to getting what she wants whenever she wants, isn't used to sharing something she likes, and her dad probably doesn't discipline her in a way that would get rid of these negative traits. Trying to liven up the party, she starts to dance with Mrs. Persilius, causing the guests to storm out, and the kid's mom telling her she won't get another invitation unless she behaves from now on. And in another surprise reaction, Pippi is saddened by this news, commenting how she should have stayed at sea and that she'll become a pirate instead as she solemnly walks out the door. I like that we're now beginning to see a recurring personal issue for Pippi. First at the school, now at the tea party, and starting to sense she doesn't fit in among people in her hometown. It's not dwelled upon for too long, and if we had gotten a scene of her at home talking to Mr. Nilsson about wanting to make a good impression and acting properly before heading out to the tea party, springboarding off the criticism from the school teacher, I think it would have been even more impactful. That night, Pippi looks out her window, cutting to a montage of her and her dad spending time together, as she says goodnight to him and her mother who's in heaven. It's sweet, and what makes it is that it's not these grandiose memories of them on their rip-roaring adventures or thrilling expeditions. It's these incredibly simple times they shared, like reading a book and her falling asleep on his shoulders as they walk down the beach. It's not long, it's not over-dramatic, but it's the most tender moment of the film, until Pippi returns to her old self and goes to count the gold coins in her chest. As she does, coins strewn across the floor, the robbers enter the house, flabbergasted by the money waiting to be taken, but retreat after learning what they think to be a man named Mr. Nilsson lives with her. They return the following evening, and after learning of Mr. Nilsson's true identity, she amusedly allows them to take the treasure chest, but once they struggle removing it due to the weight, she easily lifts it over her head with one hand and says, "Now I hope you don't mind if I take it back." That made me laugh, and is one of those great, unforced ways of showing her strength in a normal situation that people can only marvel at. In an effort to stick around long enough to get the cash, Thunder agrees to teach her to dance, making Bloom blow into a comb in a fun little dance sequence. While providing musical accompaniment, he stuffs his pockets with gold, but Pippi shakes them loose from him, saying he can't dance all weighed down. At various points in the movie, Pippi will say or do things that make me wonder, is she totally unconscious to people's true motivations and she's just lucking into good fortune? Or is she a little more aware than she lets on? Exhausted from the fast-paced dancing, they bolt into the night to avoid any more activity with Pippi, who tries to keep them a second longer to reward them with gold coins. The next day, before heading out to the circus with her friends, Pippi sets a house trap in case of intruders, while the thieves hide in the bushes. But it's Mrs. Persilius who ends up tripping the security system, ending with her covered in sticky oil, which causes the two brutes to try and hold in their laughter before being unable to contain it anymore. It's the absolute smallest laugh for the audience, but my favorite, because it's such a true-to-life reaction. There could be the best written dialogue or action sequence, but when a character involuntarily shows a side of themselves they can't fake, It becomes a real moment that, again, makes them feel less like a cartoon character and more like a real person, which is possibly the highest form of achievement any cartoon can receive, and it does that here naturally. Despite them being on the run, Mrs. Priscillius finds value in having them help her get Pippi, so they team up. But I'm not entirely sure what their plan's supposed to be. I know the two men want her treasure, but are they planning on kidnapping Pippi, or catching her and having the police take her away? They never say, and the lack of clarity makes it so I'm not quite sure what the viewer, or Pippi for that matter, should be looking out for. As the circus wraps up, the kids ride away on horse, with the criminals in a circus car, Mrs. Priscillius on a bike, and the police in their squad car, all driving after Pippi, which ends up a lackluster climax. Aside from Bloom getting on the hood of the car and falling off, nothing happens. They never come close to catching her, and Pippi doesn't even notice they're being chased. What could have been a thrilling or even funny action scene is completely glossed over, mostly just showing them riding home. It's a bit of a letdown, and a chase scene with Pippi could have been really out of the box. But instead, if this were cut from the film, it wouldn't have been felt or noticed. The criminals beat Pippi home and go into her house as the kids arrive. Mrs. Priscillius, embarrassed for the last time, and looking as scary as ever, emerges from a bush screaming, "You had your last laugh, you impossible little wretch. You're coming with me this minute or else," and closes in on the girl. And for the first time in the entire movie, we see a new emotion from Pippi: fear. An honest show of terror. And for the girl who can protect and take care of herself, it's a powerful sight to see her revert to being an actual, vulnerable child. But that state is quickly bypassed as her dad enters the scene, hugging Pippi and having a cute back and forth. They only share a few minutes of screen time, but I love the relationship they have together. The thieves, who set off the home protection device, run out of the house, jumping over the outside gate, and inadvertently land into the back of the police car. In their minds, probably relieved. With everything wrapped up, Pippi and her pets are ready to set sail, saying goodbye to Tom and Annika, who cry about losing their new friend. And it strikes a chord with Pippi, who, not wanting to see her new friends saddened by her departure, and wanting to stay herself, picks the two kids up on horse, and they ride off into the sunset. Pippi Longstocking had a limited theatrical release in the US, bringing in just over $500,000 against an $11 million budget. A massive loss. There would be one more attempt at success with this version of Pippi, as later in the same year, an animated series, also titled Pippi Longstocking, featuring the same characters, would be released and run for 26 episodes, airing on various stations worldwide. The series would finish less than a year after its premiere, and that would be the end of this Pippi's run. The Pippi Longstocking movie is an interesting case. It's not the greatest animated film of all time, the plot is loose, the songs feel like they're at the border between silly to truly great, and with a few alterations, I think this could have been a really great children's movie. But at the same time, I'm glad the movie isn't a prisoner to conventional standards. I like that it goes at its own pace, not falling to the typical plot points and having to hit every stereotypical emotional beat. The songs are still stuck in my head as much as any other animated tune, even though I can regularly only remember one or two lines. When I think of Pippi, I don't think of any deep character arc or growth. I think of the fun-loving kid that smiles in the face of danger, who deals with her problems using infectious positivity. It's a rare film where the facets that could be considered its biggest shortcomings are the things that I end up loving most about it. It's not a by-the-books, cookie-cutter movie in any fashion, and that's what makes it so unforgettable. When I watch it, I'm thrust back into my old family living room, sitting on the floor, and putting in this VHS rental tape to watch for the upteenth time. It will never be considered a staple of animation, and people's perceptions of it may never change, even with the second, third, or fourth viewing. But it is a classic of my childhood, and that's all it needs to be, a perfectly imperfect movie.